Hey guys, thank you for coming. This is Joe McBride with BoatWrx. We're here with some of the BoatWrx and BaitWrx Pro staff. We're kicking off the first of a 4-week series leading up to the Midwest Fish Tournaments and Anglers in Action Big Bass Bash, April 22nd and 23rd. We're here to talk about fishing, upcoming events and demo rides that BoatWrx has, as well to just have a roundtable discussion to help you guys out with some fishing, recap some of the past weekend's tournament. We've got some great top finishers in the OMTT sitting here, and to just have a good time. So thank you for joining us, and we're going to start it off.
Great, Joe. Hey, all, this is Bess and Bob behind the camera. Not enough chairs for me to sit at the camera, so I'm going to be firing questions at these guys about the Big Bass Bash. Couple things I just want to mention, and we'll talk about this over the coming weeks. This is an excellent format. Tune in. We'll be doing these videos. We're doing this video on Tuesday evening today, and we'll be doing these on each Tuesday evening leading up to the Big Bass Bash right here from BoatWrx with BoatWrx Pro staff, as well as some other pro staff will be joining us in some of the other roundtables as well. Our game plan is to talk about, as we lead up to the Big Bass Bash, not only how you can, what the right strategies, techniques, baits might be to win that $100,000, but also, as I encourage the team here at the table, and I encourage you all as anglers, keep in mind there's 325 payouts during this 2-day tournament. So you can weigh in a fish during every 2-hour period for 2 days. So there's 8 payout periods. Yes, the $100,000 fish is really important, but you can strategize for catching 4-pounders, 5-pounders, 6-pounders to maximize your take and perhaps run into a big one. It's hard to target 7-pounders on Lake of the Ozarks. We all know that. We would all love to catch them, but you can almost think about this as, yes, I want to catch that biggest one for $100,000, but think about it as cashing a $1,000 check every 8-hour period. And usually that's going to take probably about a 5-pounder, maybe a 4.5-pounder. So we'll talk a little bit about some of that strategy with these pros and how they would approach it. So enough from Bass and Bob. We'll be in touch. You'll see this video on the BoatWrx YouTube page and on bassandbob.com. So I'm going to throw it out to the table first. So we're 3.5, just about 4 weeks away from the Big Bass Bash. A number of anglers, it's on their mind. Some of them, it's the only tournament they fish and the only opportunity they have to pre-fish might be to come on the Thursday or Friday before the tournament. But we're 3.5 weeks away. What kind of things, if you can come to the lake right now this time of the year, or you just need to do some research, what kind of things would you be paying attention to right now to prepare yourself for either catching the big bass or cashing a lot of checks?
I think the thing to think about is look at the weather, a long-term forecast. Long-term forecast in the weather, lake level. Are we on a warming trend, cold front? The lake's still 654.5, so it's basically a winter pool. And as evidenced by this weekend, I think a lot of fish have moved up. I think there was 6 fish over 7 pounds. Yep. So we're really in the heart of what I would consider the pre-spawn bite. And I think depending on that weather, you're starting to get into the late pre-spawn. Some fish are going to be spawning by then. I know if you tuned in last week, Dion talked about more of that first full moon in May where the majority of those fish are spawning, but you're going to have some of that going on. So you're going to have a lot of techniques and areas that come into play for that spring Big Bass Bash. Sometimes that water's still in the mid-50s, and there's been other times where it's in the mid-60s. So I think the big thing to watch is your long-range forecast starting now, the lake levels. Are we going to get a bunch of rain? I think those are the sort of things that you kind of need to look at to, prepare what lures, what areas of the lake an angler's going to target.
Something I always kept in mind when I was fishing the bass too was, it's obviously going to draw a lot of boats. There's going to be I don't know, Bob, what is it, 2,000 anglers, 4,000 anglers, something like
There'll be 3,000 plus. And by the way, for our members watching, this is Michael Harlin, young stud, been doing well over the last several years. Won last year's FLW Toyota Series and finished, I think, in third place in with his partner Austin there in the OMTT this last weekend with 23 something pounds. So yes, about 3,000 anglers. But I think we all want to know, how did you catch and where did you catch 23 pounds this last weekend, and how surprised were you that was only third place?
Actually, that's a funny story about that is on the way in, I told Austin before that tournament started that it was going to take 23 to 24 pounds to win. And we caught him pretty good, and on our way back in, we made a stop in the Glaze, and then between that stop in the Glaze to PB2, I looked over at Austin and I said, man, I don't think that we got enough to win. I don't feel like we got enough to win. And obviously, you come in with 24 pounds, you're going to have a pretty good chance, as good a chance as any, and I'll be dang if I wasn't right and we didn't have enough to win, which doesn't shock me. I mean, it's that magic time in March that, guys just absolutely smash them. So we caught all those fish on a stick bait, every single one of them.
And it's probably important to go a week back, how we figured that out.
Yeah, so we fished the American Bass Trail the week before, and that was the only day we'd been on the water since Anglers in Action, which was a couple weeks ago. And we were planning on making a big river run, and it was a real cold morning, and the river fish just don't like that cold 30s, 40-degree weather. They like that sun. And once we got there that morning, it was like 38 degrees and cloudy, and we decided to make a stop before we ran all the way up the river, and thankfully we were able to capitalize on a 6-pounder. And we went ahead about 10 and ran up the river and wasted a whole bunch of time, and with about an hour of fishing time left, we ran back down to where the area we caught that, that mid-lake area where we caught that big one, and we caught them really good the last 30 minutes. So we said the OMTT was our only day on the water. We hadn't had any other time on the water throughout the week, so we told ourselves we were just going to stay in that area, and that's what we did. And thankfully, we made the right decision. We were in the right part of the lake, and we're able to catch those fish. It was just a mix of that warming water with some clarity. A lot of guys are looking for that dirty water right now, but it's just not warm enough and it's not dirty enough to hunt that out yet. So we got in that, happy medium. It's not crystal clear, but it's not dirty either. And, it was still in the 40s pretty much. Might have touched 50 throughout the day, but that's what we targeted, and we targeted staging fish with a stick bait. I think we maybe caught a couple on a crankbait and a jig, but every fish we weighed was on a stick bait. So.
And I'd say midday we actually did move into that dirtier water just to see. Once that water temperature started to rise, we moved into some dirty water, threw a spinnerbait around, and it really wasn't going on. And we moved right back out to where the clarity started to happen again, and we started to catch them. And you could even do it in the larger creeks. As we got further back in the creek where the water was a little more stained, we're getting fewer and fewer bites. If we moved out to the front of the creek where that water is the clearest, we're getting most of our bites on jerkbait.
Staging areas, points, and channel bends.
And so that's great. Thank you for that input.
Yep.
So table Hibdons. So, that's now. We still have 3.5 weeks. What are the sort of things that you'd be looking for, kind of leading off of what Michael and Austin just said that happened in the last couple of weeks? What are the things that you're going to be keying on in the coming weeks?
I travel all over the world, and I can tell you right now, this time of the year is when fish change daily. It's not like they're going to be changing in 3 weeks. No, they're going to change 10 times before that tournament happens. But the nice thing about what these guys are doing, Lawson the weekend before had a big old sack. What these guys did, all that tells everybody is the fish have moved up. Okay.
And when you say move up, tell us what that means. Does that mean they move back in the creeks, or they move closer to the banks?
Move closer to the bank. There's less of them suspended now. Say during the Toyota, the bulk of the big bass then during the Toyota were suspended, and they were out with shad and stuff like that. The bulk of them now are on the bank, and they're relating to banks. They're relating to points, stuff like that. they're connected to the shoreline now. And they will not leave that shoreline. I don't care if it snows between now and then. They've already made their move to the bank. They're going to be close to the bank. You're going to be bank-oriented fishing by the time the deal rolls around.
What does that mean, connected to the bank, Dion?
Well,
I've heard this before.
You're going to be throwing at the shore
Got
for
it.
the most part.
Yeah.
You know, can you still catch one on live scope? Absolutely. And can you still catch one out in the open on live scope? Absolutely. But he's probably going to be shallower than what they were, you know, a few weeks back. And normally in the springtime, when they make that move up and get closer to the bank, they're there. They're not moving back out. They want to be on the shoreline, okay?
Right.
All these bass are sick to death of eating shad. They're tired of shad. They've eaten shad all freaking winter long. They're done with that, okay? I'm not saying that they're done with it. They will still eat a jerk bait when the day is right. They're still going to eat shad-oriented baits when the day is right. But now they're mixing a few crawdads in with their diet, okay? Right. Because they've moved to the bank once a day, I believe, maybe a couple of times a day, especially by the time they get here. By the time the big bass happens, big bass bash happens, there's going to be, the bulk of the big ones are going to be roaming the banks, roaming the shorelines, feeding on crawfish, okay? It's just a big diet. That's what they love, okay? Shad, they eat those because they're the most plentiful, okay? That's the easiest to catch, they're the most plentiful. But when they move to the bank and they get close to the shore, them crawdads are a big deal to them, okay? And a lot of it, like I say, is because I'm kind of sick of them shad. They've eaten them all winter long, and that's their main diet. So once they kind of move to the bank, they make that little migration to the bank, they don't leave it. They're not going to leave it until they're done spawning, okay? Do I believe they're going to spawn between here and there? No, not the good ones. They do that according to the length of day. Okay, you can see some up there cruising around, and you can even see a 3-pounder every now and then standing on one of those beddy-looking deals. And but they're really not spawning. You know, the full moon in May is when it happens. It's been that way as long as I've been alive. They do it by the length of day. Okay.
So let's talk for a minute, Dion table. Let's talk about banks. We have 90 miles of shoreline. We have banks that are ledges, main lake ledges, big rock banks, pea gravel banks, mixed rock banks. We got banks that have, you know, wood associated with them. What kind of banks are we talking about? Or is it every kind of bank?
I'll tell you one real quick deal, and I tell it on my seminars anywhere, you know, but Lake of the Ozarks is the easiest lake in the world to fish. For one reason, okay?
It's good to be you, Dion.
And this is going to be as common sense as it can be. They start on the deepest bank in those major creeks in the wintertime. That's where they're going to be. They're going to be on the deepest channel swing in there, okay? Now, once it starts warming up a little bit, their mind gets on spawning, okay? Now, no, they're not going to spawn until May, but every move they make is moving them closer to a spawning area. So when you go out on Lake of the Ozarks, when you're on the deepest channel bank in a creek, guess what? Some of it's going to be sheer. Some of it's going to be sheer rock, or you're going to be sitting close to the bank, sitting in 20 feet of water, and you could pitch to the bank, okay? Now, as they migrate through the spring, as every time the water temperature warms up a little bit, they just head down that bank. They leave that spot. The next thing they encounter is chunk rock. Okay, where the rock breaks up. As the rock gets smaller, they're moving closer to pea gravel to spawn. Guess what? That's how I fish this lake I went out yesterday for 2 hours, okay? I had to take a test drive for BoatWrx. I started on a big rock bank, a bank like that, because I felt like the Toyota was when they were on sheer banks, real deep stuff. Don't worry, I know where you fished. Needless to say, as they migrate, they go through big rock, smaller rock, smaller rock, smaller rock, all the way down to pea gravel, where is the ultimate place for them to spawn. When you start fishing, just put your trolling motor down, start on one of the deeper banks, head to a spawning cove. As you head to that spawning cove, you are going to go through every stage of the bank where they're going to be. When you start getting bit, guess what? That's where they're at. That's the stage they're at. Right. And you can do that on any creek on Lake of the Ozarks till you find them. They found them the other day somewhere not too far from a channel swing type bank, okay?
Yeah.
And those fish, they can keep up with them because they fish, you guys fish 3 or 4 days a week probably, a little bit. Now, I'm not saying they fish all the time, but you keep up with them. The next time they go out, they're gonna be a little tiny bit closer to that smaller rock, and they're just gonna keep right on moving.
Yeah.
And you can use that on Lake of the Ozarks right up till they're on pea gravel banks, spawning.
And so, Table, Lawson, others. So this is, maybe a wives' tale, I don't know. That what Dion just described, yes, it sounds easy. No, it's not easy. But because you still got to go find them, you got to be in the right place at the right time, that type of thing. I've heard that kind of stuff starts mostly in the river area and progresses down to the dam. Is that right? Or is there water temperature involved, or North Shore versus, south, north banks that warm up earlier? What are your thoughts about area? And, we'll dig deeper into the area of the lakes as we progress through our Tuesday meetings, but just following on what Dion said, what is it about areas of the lake as it relates to that type of migration? Is it everywhere, or does it start someplace?
Oh, it definitely will start in an area. There is little hot stretches right now. There's, 3 or 4 that are pretty hot right now. But
And why are they high? I won't ask you where they are, but where are they?
You can write a book on this.
yeah, a lot of that depends on water clarity and water temperature. To say I pay much attention to which bank the sun hits the most, I really don't. That comes along with just getting out there and figuring out where you can get a bite.
Right.
Because this time of year, normally when you get a bite, there's more than one there.
Right.
And, if I catch one, I'm going to slow way down, because you're definitely going to catch some more. And that leads right up to when they're standing there on the bed,
Right.
Even when they're on the bed, normally they're not alone. There's always several around.
Right.
And I just really try and focus in on an area and figure out how to catch them there. Well, that's probably not necessarily the right thing to do. You probably need to fish more and, really try and pick out.
We have 90 miles
Well, yeah,
of lake,
that's the
so
thing. There's
how do
way too
how
much
do
to
you
fish.
break that down?
It's hard.
Burn a lot of expensive boat
Yeah,
gas.
yeah, you burn a lot of that $5 gallon gas right now, but it is hard. And to say, I would try and cover a bunch of the lake in that deal, no, because they live everywhere. And you can literally, anywhere you set your boat down, win $100,000 on Lake the Ozarks. That's just the way it is.
Especially by that time of the year.
Yeah.
There's no
They're
place you
everywhere.
can't win.
Yeah, you can win on any part of the
Yeah, and that's my biggest thing. I did get to fish it a couple times, and I caught myself avoiding people more so than going to where I knew where one was living, because there's just so many people out there roaming down the bank, chucking spinner baits and whatever. I tried to get away from people. Well, you can't really do that either when there's 3,000 boats on the lake. So my opinion was always just kind of slowing down and trying to find out how to catch that big one, because you can slow down on Lake the Ozarks and you're always around them. It might seem like you're not sometimes, but you're always around them, especially if you're on the right type of bank. If you figure out a bank in one creek, that's the nice thing about Lake the Ozarks. Pretty much every creek, not everyone, but most of them have the same features to them. They're all going to have some kind of a channel bank.
Right.
They're all going to flatten up in the back. So you can pretty well progress through the entire, from the low end up. To say way up the river is the thing to do. Yeah, there's a lot of big fish up there.
A lot of big fish by the dam, too.
Yeah.
There's
No, it
25 pounds in every creek.
It is
on this
not
lake.
easy, that, in my opinion, that I try and hunt out the best fish population no matter where I'm at. Well, on Lake the Ozarks, they all get hauled out of the river down here to the low end. So that's probably where I would go. You're gambling, so.
I remember interviewing your grandpa, Guido, Dion's dad, several years ago when I first started Bass and Bob, doing one of these kind of, deals before the Big Bass Bash. And his comment was, Bob, for me, it's pretty simple. The glaze is a hatching zone for big fish. Why anybody would not fish in the glaze, I don't know, other than, like you said, a lot of pressure. But I think, that just like you guys are doing a great job simplifying it, that was pretty simple for me to understand. So, Steve and Peyton, so I have one issue that I have personally, not what your comments are, is we know a jig's gonna catch a fish. We know a jig's a primary forage. We know you guys have made a living catching fish on jigs. And I probably buy 50 Darts jigs a year and hope I'm the first one to get them before they're all sold out. And I catch a lot of big fish on that jig. But it sure seems like I'm fishing awful slow and I'm not covering a lot of water. As you're preparing for a tournament, like the Big Bass Bash, and we're a few weeks out, maybe some guys are gonna come this weekend and start looking for some of those things that you guys are talking about in terms of rock changes and that type of thing. Is there a strategy to be had for covering some water with maybe a rock crawler or curve 55 crankbait or spinnerbait or maybe even the Alabama rig, or do you just slow down on a piece of bank, throw the jig? Because to me it's like watching paint dry, but I love the bite. I mean, it feels so good when you figure them out. What are your thoughts in terms of strategy as it relates to actually covering some water and figuring out what these guys are talking about?
Well, I mean, covering water right now is a big deal because you're at 654 right now. You're not going to be in the third week of April. Truman Lake is what, it's about 3.5 feet high at Truman right now. So we got that water coming down slowly. And then if we get any rain, which we're going to have by the time third week of April, you could see, 657. 657 dirty water, floating sawdust and all that good stuff. That being said, if that doesn't happen, you look at the guys that are throwing swim baits and covering water with it. It's true there's more big bass on the lower end of the lake here. I mean, especially with like what Guido said, that's absolutely true. It used to be before there was a lot of fish dumped at PB2, the big bass would be caught out of the glaze. But now there's a couple million extra fish there, and it's hard to compete out of the glaze sometimes. So there's so many fish there. A guy could literally stay right there around PB2 and catch the big bass. I mean, why not?
Get a ticket. Take your ticket.
$5 gallon gas.
Take your ticket and follow 50 other guys in there.
And something Steve and I were talking about the other day. I mentioned on the last round table. It takes so long to get from PB2 to the river in a regular tournament. The thing that happens with 3,500 boats is there's a lot of fishing pressure from people that launch a boat off their dock in that tournament. It's one of the great things about that tournament is you can start anywhere and you just can't start fishing until 7 o'clock. I think it's 6:30 in the spring. Yeah. But sometimes when you go to an area that you think is away from the pressure in that tournament, sometimes there's more pressure than an area like a creek in the river is used to. Because what guy that lives up in Little Buffalo or Big Buffalo hasn't caught a 7-8 pounder in their cove?
Right.
Well,
yeah.
It's probably worth that $200 to enter and see if you can catch that fish.
Right. Yeah.
So, there's also an element, I think more what Lawson said, try to find a place that doesn't have 10, 15 boats in it. Maybe throw a bait, a swim bait like Steve mentioned. By that time you could be getting into top waters, a bait that maybe targets a 5+ pound fish. And then there's the element of luck.
Yeah.
If you're fishing, a 4 or 5 pound fish is going to be a lot of times in the same type area, same type bait as a 7 or 8 pounder.
Yeah.
You might just put it in front of one. So I think
be lucky. Yeah, lucky makes a big
Yeah.
And confidence. If you don't have any confidence in what you're doing, if you don't have confidence, like Joe said, throwing a swim bait or throwing a jig, you're going to catch the most of your fish doing what you're the most confident in. So whether
I think what you ought to put out at some point in time to help everybody, what it's been won on every year.
I've got it.
Because I know it's been one on Shaky Head 3 or 4 times.
Well, I'm gonna tell you right now, this,
And that's somebody that's confident they're on a shaky head or a single.
and this,
That's right.
this goes exactly to what Peyton said, and we'll talk about that. I've got the information. When I'm on the radio, I'm always talking about it. But last year, the top 3, all right? Top 3 was 689, caught on the last day on a brush hog. Up around the dam area, off the bank, nothing really special, pea gravel type stuff. Second place was caught by Elhana on a spinnerbait on mixed rock, but a lot of what you guys are saying, what you've been saying, Dion, doesn't have to be in 25 feet of water, closer to the bank. Third place was caught on a crankbait in the first hour, and that was a 689 or something like that. Caught on a crankbait, likely a rock crawler or something like that, in the glaze in the first period. And when we go back over time, from what I recall, but I will bring that information over the next coming weeks as we get closer. But shaky head worm has been big. Spinnerbait with the big thumper blade, that's been big. And then it's been jigs and creature baits. 2 times, one on the Carolina rig, Crocalgator swamp bug. And it's been a couple years ago, spinnerbait up the river. You know, like I said, last year, 3 mile marker in the guy in his, I believe it was his cove, and I think that goes back to practice and exactly what you guys are all saying. You can catch them. You can catch the $100,000 fish any place on this lake, like Peyton said, with your confidence bait. If you think you need to throw a spinnerbait, throw a spinnerbait or a jig, whatever your confidence is. But you can catch them any place on this lake, and you can catch them at any time. But when it comes to preparation, I think your dad, or maybe it was you, Dion, said this a couple years ago when we had this similar thing, is, and what Joe just said, don't worry about getting out of your cove at the 6 mile marker and feel like you got to go run to Warsaw just because you're hearing all this chatter about big fish are being caught by the, you know, up there, up the river. There's big fish caught everywhere. Learn your area and expand, fish your history spots with your history baits and take your chances, you know. And again, for me, when I think about it, I can't fish it, but I think about it, is I'm thinking about how can I cash $8,000 worth of checks and run into a big one and maybe get the $100,000.
Well, that's kind of the way, when I have fished this tournament, that's kind of the approach I've taken. I'm not necessarily worried about pressure or anything like that. My approach is going in like it's a 5 bass every time. That's how I've always done well, is going in just trying to catch numbers of fish, trying to find a good population of fish. And in a 5 bass tournament, I'm already trying to catch a kicker.
Right.
You know, that's one of the things I'm after anyway. And so when I take that approach, you know, I've never won the thing, but I have cashed plenty of checks in it. Every single time it's because I'm just doing
And that's rewarding.
Yeah. And I'm not really worried about the pressure. If I see people in that area, you know, they're usually doing one thing and they're covering a ton of water, or whatever it is. I'm going to go in, fish the banks I think fit my pattern for that day. Because like Dion said, it's changing every single day.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do that day, and I'm just going to run it like I'm fishing a tournament. And that's the only way I've ever looked at it. And I think that's been probably my best way to cast checks.
Yeah.
I've probably spent more time practicing for this tournament than anybody here, okay? For one reason, Lawson's twin brother can still fish it because he don't fish tournaments for the most part. And before it, I tried to get out there and help him. You know, I tried to get out and find something that will make a difference. And like I said, lots of times I've practiced a week, you know, before the tournament. I have spent time, sometimes when it's swim bait time of the year, I've thrown swim baits that you can't get in the lake without it, you know. I've thrown 12-inch swim baits, I've thrown glide baits, I've thrown giant top waters all day long, just to see if it made a difference on me getting one bite. And the main thing that I've always found is you have to be catching fish. Okay? You can throw that giant stuff if you want. And if you pull it in front of a big one in the right frame of mind, he might eat it. But can you do that 8 hours a day for 2 solid days?
And get no confidence
if
bites?
You get 2 bites?
Can you make yourself
Most
do
people
that?
can't do it.
Right.
Right.
And if you're not
Okay.
going to, then you might as well not.
I'm a highly trained professional at this. And it's
Yes, you are.
every day I've practiced that way to try to find him 1 or 2 big bass. About noon, I'm done with it. I am sick to death of throwing that type of stuff because you get bored with it.
Yeah.
Guess what? If you start putting a little bit of hourly pressure on yourself, oh man, I've only got 30 minutes left in this period, you better be catching a bass every now and then.
Right.
So throw baits you're catching fish on. You know, have fun. You know, spend that 2 days kind of catching a few fish because guess what? Bigger is not better for a big bass.
Yeah.
I mean, we catch a lot of fish on a jig that's that big.
You can really overcomplicate it.
Yes.
And I think, Bob, you touched, I don't know if we have on video, 45 spots every 2 hours.
Right.
And the beauty of the tournament is it's grown so much, thanks to their hard work and promoting it, is you may catch let's say you catch a 5.5 pounder that second period of the first day. Then maybe you grab a big swim bait in an area where you were catching some fish because all the pressure's off.
Yeah.
Hey, I got my $600-800. We paid for our trip. Everybody's been there where it's like, okay, I got my entry fee back. Then go out and maybe experiment a little bit.
And Joe, I can recall just over the last several years of me following the Big Bass Bash and being on the radio, interviewing winners, interviewing pros like you guys. There's been a couple of years ago, there have been 2. And I think it was spring. I'm sorry, I think it was fall, not spring, where the biggest fish was caught on a big giant swim bait. And that's out of, I guess they're on 15 years now.
I think
that was fall.
I think a lot of that though is that's where the trend is the
Yeah.
is the big baits.
Right.
It's always been around, but it's definitely gained a lot of popularity within the last few years.
Right.
Probably one because there's more companies local to us making those big style homemade garage type swim baits. Homemade stuff, not mass produced stuff. And, I just think that's where we're trending. Whether it's a big paddle tail or a big glide bait or whatever, that's the popular thing to do. When, like they said, in all reality, as that gets popular, there's less fish to be caught on it. Because one of the things with it is they're not seeing it. It's got a lot of draw power. It pulls
Right.
big fish. And you may not catch them, but if they're seeing 6, 10, 15, 20 of them a day or a week, then you're going to start not seeing that work as well.
And I guess to Dion's point too, and Bass and Bob represents the average fisherman because I am the average fisherman. And yes, I've thrown the big swim baits. But you know what? I want to get bit. I want to get some bites. Once I get some bites, I got some confidence, whether it's a shaky head, whether it's a jig, whether it's a crankbait, whatever. And that's going to give you confidence, and you'll put it together and you may collide with a 6 or 7 pounder.
The thing about that big swim bait too, the one guy that won on the big swim bait,
Yeah.
he was a swim bait professional.
That's what he does.
Okay,
That's the
he
only
came
way.
from the part of the world where it got invented,
Right.
and he could very easily go out there and throw it for 16 hours for one bite.
Yeah.
Okay, he was not just anybody chunking a swim bait out there.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that's
It takes
why-
there's a skill set, just like with the A-rig. I mean,
Well,
the
it's not a
A-rig,
skill set at all, it's just a confidence.
there's a skill
He
set.
don't care if he catches one.
Right.
That's all he's got to catch.
Right,
And
exactly.
Oliver Nagy did that. That was impressive. He kind of came here with that mindset and boom, won that 100,000. Made it look easy. And I'm like Dion, I get tired of that bait real quick.
Well, he didn't make it look easy. It was in the last period. And he got his ass kicked the rest of the time.
Yeah,
And
but
so,
that's the thing, he never caught a bass
to
the
hell
rest
with
of the whole
to hell with him because he violated the rules anyway and should have been DQ'd. However, the young kid,
the kid from Arkansas won this one
next
also.
year, he's that guy you're talking about, I could care less about him. He should have never been here. The kid that Dion's talking about, that's what, when I interviewed him, that's what he and his buddy do. They go throw the swim bait. They ain't doing like making money on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. It's just it's part of the cult that they're in.
I think he did it in fall of 2020.
Yeah.
He was right here in this room.
Yeah.
We did a roundtable with them
Yeah.
right here.
Yeah.
Funny
So-
story.
So it had to have been last fall.
Yeah. I think it was Dion, and it was fall.
I met him, to Dion's point, I met him this weekend at the Red Crest.
Yeah.
In his swim bait box, he got me to buy one, a smaller one. But it was like a starter box. But his, I mean, it was $20,000-$30,000 of swim baits. So when he goes, he knows, okay, this one works in this condition. And like Dion said, it's really, really easy to go throw that and not catch a fish.
Right.
And I asked him what he did with the money, and he said he bought more swim baits. So
He improved his box.
And what was really cool, what I loved about him is young kid, him and his buddy, we talk about this all the time. Obviously, we all have these decked out Camuses. He had some old boat.
Yeah, like a bass
Hopefully he upgraded his boat at some point or another.
With like a 60 horse on it.
But the reality is, I don't think the fish really care about the boat. We care about the boat because we like comfort and we like to get around. At Lake of the Ozarks, you better have the right kind of boat, like a Camus boat. But it was just very humbling. The other guy, Nagy or whatever his name is,
The guy's name is
should have never been in this tournament in the first place. And it was very discouraging for a lot of people. But it is what it is. They've cleaned up the rules since then, but whatever. So
Yeah, it kind of pissed me off too,
it pissed me off too.
that they let him fish and
I didn't.
not me.
Everybody's like, everybody's like, I want to fish.
There's not a person sitting there at this table ain't a little bit pissed off about that.
Fish for 100 grand.
That's
Win
right.
$100,000 and spend only what's the entry fee? Just a little under $200.
Like 180 for
I
2
mean,
days.
the risk versus reward, on the business side of it, that's a great tournament.
Yeah.
Best tournament really in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, because anybody, there is nobody going out there that doesn't have a chance of catching a giant because they live here.
Yeah.
I mean, the last couple weekends have been proof of that. They live here.
And to that point, they were all caught. It was a no A-rig tournament.
Right.
That 6 or
Right.
7 pounders got caught.
Dale Bergman caught an 8-pounder.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
And it was
a
either
true
on
giant.
a jerkbait or a jig.
And
Nothing
with-
special. Nothing
well,
crazy.
I would have to add in there maybe a spinner bait because
Right. Okay,
Dale
that's
will
true.
catch him on a spinner
That's
bait, but just like we talked about, and he's caught some good ones on a crankbait this time of year too.
But to Austin's point, though, it's
No.
nothing special.
No.
It's nothing that
No,
everybody's
it's
got those in
no,
their
it's no some
Right.
big swim bait or something like
Right.
that, that type of deal.
There's nothing I'm ever gonna tell you about that you can't go right down there at the tackle store and buy,
Yeah,
okay? Because I don't,
unless they're out of Dirk's jigs.
well.
Then they need to
that's
call
your
me because
problem.
now
You
I'm
can't come up
I'm
with-
selling them for $40 a piece now.
You guys need to work harder at schmoozing dirt, that's all I tell you.
I can't sit up here and act like if I was able to fish that I wouldn't go throw a big bait all weekend. But that's just like they said. It all comes down to confidence.
Right. And it comes down to what Steve said, return on investment. It's like, if I'm going to go burn 8 hours, $180, and if that is going to give me the best opportunity, let's face it, out of 3,000 anglers, to catch one that's 8 pounds or bigger, then,
That's the odds.
and you're talking about 3,000 anglers, 16 hours of your day, gonna have to catch one. The biggest one so far in the spring has been 796. Last year was 769. Hasn't been an 8-pounder yet. It's always been a 7+ pounder. So the question is investing in the bait, investing in 16 hours with a great big bait against 3,000 anglers, pounding the hell out of the fish. Do you really feel like you're gonna catch an 8-pounder?
And then you need to pray that you land the fish.
Or, I don't know.
Or are you gonna rent?
Anyway, that's why we're having these discussions, I mean, that's why we're,
Slinging a jig or throwing a crankbait until you find that school of fish that you're confident there's a good one there.
Yeah.
And then you either back the boat off and throw a
Right.
big swim bait or a rig or
Right.
whatever you have confidence in catching a big fish on.
yeah.
I also think
You
that
have to find them.
throwing those big baits kind of it lets you jump over all that pressure a little bit if
Yeah.
that's not what they're seeing.
Right,
You
yeah.
could have had 15 people go in front of you throwing, the works at them.
Right.
And I'm sure they caught fish and plucked off some quality fish, but what that big swim bait does is it allows you to target the most obvious spots on the lake, because those fish are seeing a lot of lures.
And
but
what are those most obvious spots on the lake?
maybe it's the biggest dock.
In the end of April.
Maybe it's the biggest dock, out of a group of docks, or maybe it's one dock sitting in a pocket, or a big main lake point, or any point for that matter. Anything with wind, condo docks.
Or a huge laydown that's,
Right.
thrown in the water.
Yeah, a great
they
big laydown tree.
Flipped it 100 times. You go by with, we've actually seen that happen.
Yeah.
Where we flipped through something and then actually went back over it with a glide bait and caught one.
And then so let's just talk about the glide bait for a minute, because we know it's a big fish bait. We know it's won a couple of the big bass bash tournaments. I think you're providing some great input, obvious kind of spots that may have been hammered by a bunch of other baits. How do you work that bait? Do you let it sink to the bottom? You throw it out there and just start swimming it back? I mean, how do you work those
The
baits?
glide is a bait that you should be able to watch almost the entire retreat.
So you just want it just below the surface.
Yeah, they're mostly slow sink baits, and something that if you're an amateur in glide bait fishing that you can do is either like nail polish or a can of white spray paint, just spray paint the top of it white. The fish aren't seeing it, but it allows you to see the bait, and then you're working it properly. And once you get confidence working it, then you don't have to so much see it, you can kind of feel it. But essentially all it is you walk the dog like you would a spook or something, but it's under the water and you're using mostly your reel instead of your rod. And all you're doing is jumping a little bit of slack in your line by turning half turns in the handle. And what that's doing is making that glide bait do a number like this. And then, you can throw in more erratic motions and stuff like that, but
What kind of depths and what kind of water clarity?
they'll come an insane distance to eat a glide bait, or to at least follow it. So, I would not be scared at all to go throw that bait over a point in 20 foot of water.
Yeah, you probably want the best water clarity you can find.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
if you can't see it more than a foot and a half, you ain't gonna give me bites on it. That really narrows it down.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can't see it that deep, if that's as deep as you can see your bait, that's pushing it right
It's a
there.
visual deal.
Because it's totally a visual deal.
Yeah.
Got it.
I personally don't think.
And they'll come up off the bottom and eat it?
Absolutely, or any kind of big structure. But personally, if it was me, don't get me wrong, you can catch big fish on the glide, and there will be checks cashed on glide bait. I would probably lean the more boot tail style kick and swim bait, like a big mag draft or something of those
Right.
sorts,
Got it.
or even a hollow
Fish
belly.
the same way as you're talking about, or
Yeah.
let that hit the bottom, go to the bottom and come
That
back?
one gives you a little more versatility, because if you think that the fish aren't so high on the water, you can count it down to them and get it a little closer to them. But
Yeah.
that is a powerful, powerful tool. And like Dion said, there's going to be fish on bed at the end of April. Most of the biggest fish in the lake won't be. And that's something that I've always kind of done, is when those first waves are getting up and you're seeing everybody peeking around in pockets, I'm out there throwing that big bait,
Yeah.
finding a bunch of wind and trying to catch those fish that are still out there, because it's constant waves,
Right.
until they're done. I'd say they probably spawn into June, would you not?
Oh, they can.
Yeah. So, there's always waves of fish coming.
I can tell you my opinion of that glide bait, and I'd be curious to know about all these guys. Has anybody ever caught a 5-fish limit on one in a tournament? Because if you had,
Lawson had.
that's a stretch. That is a stroke of genius.
I tried.
That is the best day you can have. It doesn't happen very often.
It's got to be perfect.
Normally, you will have 2 or 3 through the day
Yeah.
that will commit and eat the whole damn thing. But the bulk of the time, all it does for me is it tells me where he lives.
Right.
That is my sole opinion.
I
on
catch
it.
lots and lots of bass because of a glide bait, not on a glide bait. Okay, all he's got to do is come out of that 5-6 foot of water and show himself. Now I know where he lives. Then I'm going to go back and take some of that stuff, maybe on a spinning rod that's that big.
Yeah.
I'll sit there and I'll fish till I make him bite.
Yeah.
Then is that a great way to think about?
That's a
that
great way to
deal?
think about it.
I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you why it's not for that tournament. Too many freaking boats. Because you put too many trolling motors out there, run up down them banks, then they won't even leave their piece of cover to look at it.
Right.
Okay? Yes, the first 2 hours of the first day, yes, it's an awesome bait to possibly throw to locate you one and maybe get a hold of it. Once it gets to be 9, 10 o'clock, 3,000 boats. That fish has heard a boat.
Yeah.
Okay? And those big ones, just like hunting a big deer. Okay?
Yeah.
He's only got to hear you once or twice, and he's going to tuck away, and you ain't going to see him.
Yeah.
And then the next time you get him to bite is when your stuff is right there. And that's the only reason he'll bite it. And, you know, it's kind of like that tater chip deal I talked about.
I love that.
Then you better
tell that story again,
Then
because
you have to throw something to that bass that he won't turn down. Okay?
so tell us the potato chip story, because I'm not
Well,
sure every Bass and Bob member or every boat work customer.
A lot of stuff.
I love
food, okay? It's just size of me. I mean, look at me. look. Every guy that's got an H is
Peyton's gotten pretty
Triple X,
pretty
okay?
skinny on us.
yeah. Payden's the only one, and he's on some
Starving,
sort of diet. But I mean, you know, you open up a bag of potato chips right here on this table. Okay, some of these guys ate before they got here. Even this little skinny run over here, he don't want one. He don't want one. But if it's sitting there open and he sniffs around at it a little bit before he walks away from this table, hey, are those for everybody? See, I'm to where I don't even ask. I just take some. You know, they wouldn't leave that bag open if I wasn't supposed to get some of them. But a lot of the baits that you throw at these fish, you don't want them to ever turn it down. You know, that big light bait's a great bait to catch a big one when everything's perfect. Okay? Guess what? Nothing's going to be perfect during that big bass bash, because they've already went on the defensive because of hearing all those trolling motors. Okay? The great big ones know how to hide, and they know how to stay away from that noise. You know, they're already seeing it with live scope and stuff. Guess what? Shine that live scope on them every now and then, they take right off. Somehow they feel it, they know it's there. Fishing pressure, okay? Think about how many baits a 7-pounder on Lake of the Ozarks has seen in its lifetime, okay? So my theory's always been, throw him something he won't turn down, okay? He could be standing down there by a rock or a tree or something, and, you know, a big shad come too close to him, he'll lurch out there and get it, okay? But if there's a crawdad that long anywhere, he's going to pick it up just because, well, that's tasty right there, you know, and he's going to grab it. You have your little potato chip baits in your
Right.
box, you know, that a bass won't turn down.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something. During that big bass bash, that's not a bad thing to think about.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, I'm also a firm believer in when you're fishing for a big bass, make sure your equipment's right to catch a big bass if he does bite you. You know, so I'm not going to throw my little tater chip jig on no 10-pound line. I'm going to throw it on probably, you know, 15-pound braid on a spinning rod with a, you know, 15-pound leader or something like that. Where normally, a lot of times, I will throw a little tiny jig on 12-pound line, 12-pound fluorocarbon or something like that. Okay? I'm not fishing for 3-pounders. I'm fishing for a big one.
Right.
Okay? So make sure whatever you put in the water, you know you can land a big one if he bites you, because there's lots of crap in this lake. There's brush, there's metal, everything. So don't make a mistake and throw even a tiny bait on the wrong kind of line. Okay?
Yeah.
Make sure you got something that when he does bite you, you're going to catch him.
Good stuff.
You know, because you are fishing a tournament for one bass. So just make sure when you're out there, you know, a lot of guys, well, it kills the action. No,
Catch
it
them for
doesn't.
one bass or 325, depending on how you.
But
325 checks are going to be paid.
But still, you
But
know,
I
even
understand what you're saying.
Throw
You
him
gotta-
behind cables and
Right.
stuff like that. At least make sure you got something that you're going to land him or have a good chance at
Right.
landing him. You know, just because I'm telling you to throw some smaller baits in a tough situation, make sure they're on something you can land one on.
Yeah.
Okay, and in this day and age, that's not hard.
Let me throw one other question out before we wrap up on this segment. We're almost an hour in, Joe, and I know we can go on forever, but we'll go on forever the next couple of weeks. We have 25,000 boat docks on this lake, from dam to dam. We have probably God knows how many. Let's call it 150 to 200 to 300 to 500,000 brush piles on this lake, from dam to dam. How important does cover become when you're fishing and you're preparing for your tournament? We're 3.5 weeks out. I'm gonna go fish around my cove, the next cove over, the next cove over, or whatever. How important is it to, see what's going on that type of structure? And what kind of structure would you be focusing on?
I'm kind of going to ask that question to the Hibdons, because that's probably one of the times of the year where sometimes I don't know if I should be fishing the dock.
I
Sometimes
never know.
You're not alone, me too. But it's like, should I more be fishing behind the dock? Should I be more skipping the backside of the dock? So I'm going to
Or running something alongside the docks, or finding a piece of brush that's out in 12 feet of water, like 100 yards from the bank.
I'm going to throw that question to some people that know better than me.
Sometimes I think you gotta look at the pressure that you've had put on where you're trying to fish. Is it gonna be behind the dock? Are you on day 2 in the last quarter or whatever, where they're in that little pile of brush right behind the dock, whereas throughout the first day or first little bit they would have been alongside in a pile of brush or just standing out there. The pressure has a lot to do with it. Like everybody said, there's 3,000 some boats supposed to be in it. So the more they get thrown out, the more they're gonna shy away from getting.
So if I'm,
Right out there in the open.
and that makes perfect sense. If I'm preparing for the tournament 3.5 weeks out, so I have time to burn, to go work on maybe some brush or some docks, is that something, first of all, you would even think about? And what would those kind of docks and brush be? Would it be isolated in some sort, that maybe not getting as much pressure, or would you even worry about that?
Would you worry about putting out brush?
No, I'm just talking
No,
about
I
shit.
would not put out brush.
With electronics, you can find brush. Without electronics, you can go throw a Carolina rig up the gut of a creek and have my boat in 15 minutes or 15 feet, or run it alongside of a dock, and more than likely you're gonna run into a piece of brush. But you got docks, you can swim stuff along docks, you got brush, you got isolated cover out on flats, you got wood up the river. We got hundreds of thousands of brush piles, we got 25,000 boat docks. Is this something, as you're preparing 3.5 weeks ahead of time, in your cove, the next cove next to mine, whatever, is this something you would actually even think about in terms of winning or cashing checks?
A boat dock is a little bit different this time of year for me. I focus more on what the bank looked like behind it. I mean, yeah, a boat dock is always a big fish habitat. I mean, that's one reason why we got so many good ones, because all them boat docks, and they live under them as such to where they cannot be accessed most of the time. And even in this tournament, 90% of them won't get their bait where it needs to be to catch a giant, under a boat dock. Because a lot of times he tucks up under there to where we can't get to him,
Right.
and we try really hard. But
By noon on the first day.
yeah, they get so much pressure that they pull to places where you can't physically reach them.
Right.
But to say, you should avoid a boat dock or not fish it, if I'm fishing that deal, I'm fishing everything that's accessible to me,
Right.
because you never know when he's going to bite you. Especially this time of year when there's so many options of where he could be, it doesn't really matter the bank, you could catch him on anything. He could be out there on the main lake, he could be all the way in the back of a creek, standing in no water, and everywhere in between. So you kind of got to fish it all, and every time a boat dock, comes around, I'm going to pitch around it, under it, behind it, But to say I focus on them, not as much this time of year.
Got it.
I don't feel like they use it like they do a lot of times a year to feed.
Right.
This time of year, I think they pull under there because they're getting too much pressure, but that fish probably is not
Be
gonna
hard to
caught
catch.
anyways.
Got it.
He's there because of the bank.
Yeah.
Got it. And tell what does that mean?
He's there because of what's behind the dock. What the dock is tied to, that's the reason that bass is there in the springtime.
Does that have to do?
I'm not
with,
talking
does that have
April.
to do with rock? Rock?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the rock changes,
Got it.
is where he's at. By then, he's gonna be on something pea gravel. I
Right.
mean, because he's gonna be really close to the spawn, but boat docks confuse a lot of people because they think, well, he's on boat docks on points. Well, guess
Right.
what? If that boat dock wasn't there, he'd still be on that point.
Or if
You
that
know.
boat dock stuck out 20 foot further than the rest of them, that is a point.
Right.
You know, they use those
They-
boat docks just like they use a point, you know. That is a point, that's a feeding ambush spot when that dock sticks out further than all the rest. I mean, that's, you know, when you get in a line of boat docks, you can look down and the one that sticks out the furthest, well, that's probably where he's gonna be. This time of year, that's a little different. I'll go behind that boat dock and look straight down the bank, especially when they get on pea gravel. And everywhere it makes one of those little tiny pea gravel points, there's a lot of them, especially when the water's low like this.
Yeah.
You can get back there behind him, look straight down the bank, and you can pretty well pick out where he's gonna be.
Yeah.
And when you get to one of those little pea gravel points, you better slow down and try and catch him.
A boat dock is virtually no different than a pile of brush.
Got it.
It's a good place for him to live,
Yeah.
but he's going to be migrating down that shoreline to get to where he wants to be.
Got it.
And whatever's in his way, he's going to stand around it some,
Got it.
you know. And that's what a boat
Not
dock
for
is.
very long.
That's why people get
Yeah.
confused. The only time I ever pay attention to what kind of boat dock I'm fishing is in the fall. That's it. It's got nothing to do with nothing now. Now it's just something you got to fish around.
Got it.
Okay, but coming when that happens, like he just said right there, come noon on the first day of the big bass bash. Oh yeah, I'm going to be putting my stuff under there where no man has ever been before.
Right.
Okay, and that's strictly because of the pressure.
Right.
You know, the pressure pushes those fish out, or it backs them off. Sometimes it backs them out there in front of them docks, and they suspend.
Nice.
And a fish that is suspending in shallow water, he's the hardest son of a gun on the earth to catch.
Really?
Okay? Because it's hard to get your stuff just above him, you know.
Right.
You're either throwing something that runs a little too deep or, you know. So fish that suspend in shallow water because of fishing pressure, boat pressure, they can get very tough to catch
Yeah.
because, you know, you just don't fish them right, you know.
Yeah.
As soon as the fish pulls off the bottom, he no longer is feeding on the bottom. He's looking to the surface.
Yeah.
Okay? And guess what? When he looks towards the surface, he kind of likes to have something above him. So that boat dock is just the perfect place for him to be.
Yeah.
But if he's suspended under the back corner of a boat dock, he's a miserable son of a gun to make bite. Okay?
We fish boat docks in the fall because they're hunting. They're using that dock to hunt. This time of year, they're not so focused on hunting as they are spawning and doing the deal. And that's what they're saying is they're using it for refuge this time of year as opposed to a hunting tactic.
So it's not something you're necessarily targeted, kind of like Dion said. They're
It's
just
what's
there.
behind
You got to work around them.
You got to work around him just like a pile of brush.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're
man.
following the bass down the bank from that deepest water to that spawning area, and if there are docks in the way, you fish them, but it's not necessarily what you're keying on at all. It's just another piece of cover along
Yeah.
the
It's
way.
nothing more than a refuge.
That's
Yeah.
not saying that you're not gonna pitch the front corner of the boat
Absolutely.
Yeah,
dock and
that's-
catch that down.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it happens
Right.
on a regular basis.
Yeah.
No,
They-
it's still a piece of
Pressure
cover.
happens and moves
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where
A
where
big
you
bass-
go down and throw at the bank, catch them on a jig. Yeah, they might pull on off and stand around that first piece of foam or even the front, just to get away from getting cast at all the time.
Everybody that fishes, everybody, I'm not talking this crew here that are bloodthirsty animals on the water. I'm talking anybody that goes fishing. You have a spot where you've caught multiple big bass. That's it, okay? You know why that spot works? It's the perfect spot for a big bass. You may not be able to visually look at it and tell, but there's something about that is perfect for holding a big bass, okay? You catch him off of there, guess what happens? Within a couple of hours, another one takes his place. And it is a natural pecking order. The biggest bass will take over whatever he wants, okay? And that's just the way it is. That's the way fish react,
It's
you
just
know?
like big deer.
It's right,
You kill a
absolutely.
big deer out of a holler, there's another big deer.
You see a big deer out there. I've seen big deer run and tattoo a little one right in the side, laying down in a bedding area. That's his spot, and he wants him out of there. A bass is the same way. You catch a big one, that's just a good spot where a big one's at. So go back through the Rolodex in your little pea brain and say, wait a minute, where did I catch a 5-pounder? And that's just a natural born, that's a good spot.
Dion,
Okay.
you shared that story several years ago, and it resonated with me. The way you shared that story, you gave an example that there are some boat docks. This was a boat dock oriented thing, could be anything. Could be a rock, a brush pile, whatever. You said that there's, around some docks or whatever, depending on, you're flipping some docks, you're behind a dock, there could be just a little bitty ditch underneath there. Something that maybe a blowout from a motor or something has created this indent, in the bottom. There's a couple of spots I go to regularly, certain times of the year, flipping that spot, and it could be a 5-pound Kentucky, it could be a 6-pound black, a 4-pound black, but if I catch one there, it's a big one, and it's absolutely nothing you can see on your graph, nothing you can see. So I totally get that, and I appreciate that very valid input. Fish history, guys. Go where you've caught them before, and don't stress about it. Just go fishing.
There's a reason that the Hibdons win in September, because it's one of the only time where those resident fish end up making a difference. Schooling fish and fish that you find bunches of them
Or on the
don't
move,
make as big a difference.
Yeah.
then. But if I know where a 5-pounder lives, oh yeah, I weigh him in that September 2-day BFF.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Guess what? We always are at the top of the list. And it's always because of that's the only time of the season that those fish are really go catch a resident bass.
Right.
And the only reason I win is because I got more resident bass than anybody else. I mean, I've been doing it my whole life. And I've caught fish off the same walkway dock every year. I can catch one there, okay? The springtime, you don't have that advantage. They're moving. They're heading to spawn. They're heading to spawn right today. And it's a month away, but still it's on their mind. And they're slowly, they would never migrate back deep. They're not going back the other way, okay? You might live scope one, but they're not going to go back.
Will they move off the bank? So
No.
they may
the
not
only
move.
way they'll move off is they'll suspend under a boat dock now.
Got it.
They're not going to leave. They're already attached to those boat docks. They're under them. They're on those banks. They're not leaving them. They're going to be up by the time those guys fish that tournament. That's
So
just the
let
way
me ask you a question. This is for Bass and Bob. So a couple of weeks ago, I was catching them really good in a certain area. They were shallow, pea gravel type stuff. I was catching them good and catching big ones. Now in the tournament, we only caught 3 limits and just didn't land a big one. That was 2 weeks ago. Should those fish still be there, and will more be coming?
they're right there with them.
I was gonna say those specific fish might have moved further,
Right.
but there's definitely more coming.
Right.
They're
I'll
not
tell you
moving
what.
from that area. If you caught them 2 weeks ago, they're already there.
I'll tell
Okay.
you one thing.
And
that
they
you-
might not bite.
You
Yeah.
just said it. The day that you caught some giants.
Right.
Did you catch 3 limits that day?
The day we caught giants, we caught 12 keepers, a 667, a 5, couple 4s. The day we caught the 3 limits, what happened in 2 days before that, probably caught 19 pounds in about 3 hours.
The
Tournament day came around, and we caught 3 limits, but didn't catch a kicker.
If you go out there and you're catching 50 or 60, that's a hard day. Now I'm talking about this as a tournament
Yeah,
fisherman. This
right.
is not the
Right.
typical tournament. You
Right.
know, you're only
Yeah.
hunting one.
Yeah.
But a day when you go out there and catch a whole bunch, that's hard to put together a big stringer.
Yeah.
There are exceptions. We had one the other day where we caught 25 or 30,
Right.
and we still caught a nice stringer, but it's hard to do that. If you're catching a bunch, you need to be looking, maybe moving on back or just
Right.
moving out a little bit, because those males get up there and they really start feeding. Or
Right. And we caught,
Garden area.
on those days I caught big ones. The big ones were definitely females. They were definitely fat. Did we catch a lot of numbers? Maybe 25 fish total, but 12 to 15 keepers, of which we had some kickers. And again, I'm diverting just a little bit, but I'm just curious if that was for me for this weekend in Anglers in Action, because I got to decide what to do, because right now I'm getting my ass kicked. So, but I know where I caught those. But as we transfer that into the Big Bass Bash and we get anglers coming down, maybe this weekend, next weekend coming down, just kind of like we talked about, poking around, getting ready for the Big Bass Bash. If they get into a zone where they're catching some quality fish right now, I think what I hear you saying is that's a zone that you probably should be thinking about in the Big Bass Bash, or something similar as it relates to a pattern.
Yeah, for
My-
sure.
My dad was a firm believer that a big bass only screws up a couple times in the spring. Now think about
You
it.
catch him and he's gone.
You catch him once or twice.
But you said they
that's it.
replenish.
He only screws up once or twice.
Yeah.
But like I say, and you get to thinking about that, you know, you had a little area. You know, you've already told me this story.
Right.
You know, you had just a few hundred yards of bank.
Right.
Okay. A dominant bass, like I say, it relates so much to deer hunting. It's exactly the same deal. You shoot at him one time, you're not going to see that one in the daylight again.
Yeah.
He knows, and he's been shot at before, and he will never show himself again. A big bass is the same way. You know, somebody said, you know, they got the brain the size of a pea. Well, by God, he uses it well. Because I'm just going to tell you right now, I spend a ton of time out there fishing and catching some of those fish. But if I make a flip or I pitch to a dock with a jig and I get a bite and I think, boy, not many people's going to make that pitch right there, I shake that one off for sure. I mean, I always shake that one off. Now, if it's out in the open and I pitch out there and I get a bite and I wasn't around anything, so he's out in the open, I'll jerk at that one lots of times, you know. But the thing of it is, if you catch 5 or 6 pounder, you just took him out of the picture for about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Maybe more. I mean, if he's a really big one, he's just not stupid.
Got it.
And it don't matter what you catch him on. I'm just a firm believer that, you know, every now and then you catch one of them great old big giants and he looks like he hasn't eaten for a month.
Yeah.
Guess what? He got bruised. And he is standing there sold up and he is not going to eat till he absolutely has to.
Wow.
That happens a lot. I mean, you know, lots of people don't realize, and a dominant bass on Lake of the Ozarks is a 5 pounder.
Right.
Simple as that. Now, there's a lot of them out here, tons of them. There's not many 7s and 8s. Okay? So guess what? One of them 7s gets bruised, he's kind of done. I don't care if you know exactly where he lives. He can be done for weeks, months, you know. And like I say, Dad was always a firm believer. Oh yeah, you screw one of the big ones up, he's kind of screwed up for a while.
Well, team, let me, we're at about an hour. For those watching, hopefully you have found this informative. We're going to be doing these again for the next 3 weeks. So we got 3 more hours. As we get closer to the Big Bass Bash, we'll be being able to monitor conditions a little bit better. We'll probably be able to start honing in on baits a little bit more. We'll talk about wind, water clarity, dam to dam. We have a lot, as you can tell, we can go on and on and on with this group, but I want to make sure that everybody knows who we have on our panel. I'm not sure we introduced. Austin Culverson just won the FLW Toyota Series here on Lake of the Ozarks, right?
I didn't win that.
No.
No. I got 5th place.
What did you win? You just recently won something.
I won the wild card here on Lake of the Ozarks.
The wild card, that's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Good job. And we have Michael Harlin, who last year won the FLW Toyota Series. These two finished 3rd, 4th, third place in the OMTT Hammerfest. Dion Hibden, everybody knows, is
I
only
haven't won squat so long I can't remember.
there's only a couple people on the planet that have done what he's done, winning a Bassmaster Classic and a Forest Wood Cup, and fishes the tour, and is one of the absolute best, most knowledgeable fishermen on the planet. His son Lawson just finished 3rd place in this tournament. I think you've won a couple of them here recently too. You finished 6th. And I didn't pin you down like I did them. Where did you catch them and what'd you catch them on? No, that's just 2 questions.
They're hard ones. No, we actually.
They're hard ones for pros to answer, but they're easy ones. We just want to know, what'd you catch them on and where'd you catch them?
He's buying time right now.
I can see that.
We caught them that day on a spinnerbait and a stick bait. The spinnerbait definitely caught us a few kickers. We just never got one of those big bites that day.
Oh, you only had 23 pounds.
Well, we had 1 5 pounder and that was it. Everything else was just some good solid ones.
What part of the lake?
For the most part, it was from here to the Niangua.
Cool.
We had some boat troubles, and you know, I was kind of like them. I wanted to run up, but I just couldn't do it. Well, I'm kind of glad I didn't.
I don't think it really matters because this entire lake can produce fish right now. And all those baits you're talking about, they're all in play. Steve Wilson, want to make sure we thank you, Steve, for the Bass and Bob members. You know, Steve Wilson provides our weekly fishing reports. He gets in the water all over the freaking lake. He's been doing weekly fishing reports for years and years and years. He's won several, I don't know, Redmen, FLW, stuff like that. He works here at BoatWrx. Come and see Steve. He's been working on and selling boats for years. He knows everything you need to know about boats. So Steve, thank you very much. We got Peyton Hibben, who won some major tournaments just this past year, and he's fishing the Toyota Series this year, and he's really back into the fishing, and you'll see more from the Hibdon Hooked. Tell us a little bit about Hibdon Hooked real quick, Dion.
We've needed to be branded for a long time, and get more into the YouTube and the TV show stuff. And so Hibdon Hooked is just going to be a good information deal for everybody. Anybody can, go on our stuff and look for it. And like I say, we finally branded it, and it's Hibdon Hooked.
Nice.
That's how you can look up on our website and YouTube stuff and stuff like that.
Make sure you keep it around the country, not just on Lake of the Ozarks, because
don't worry.
Bass and Bob's an important part of my life. but you guys are an important part of my life too.
Bob, I can tell you right now, there's nobody fishes as much as you.
I appreciate that. But I appreciate it. Well, I get my ass kicked a lot, but that's okay. And Joe, thank you, Dion. I appreciate it. Joe, this is your show. Why don't you go ahead and close it out?
Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't, I know Charlie and the Terrell family, they're running some early bird specials. So we haven't talked about it, get registered for the tournament. All kinds of drawings, and I think it's $500 you can win. So go to MidwestFishTournaments.com, get registered for the tournament. We're gonna have demo rides at PB2 this Friday, available from 1 to 4. So get a hold of us. We're gonna have a Camus down there. Hoping to have a skeeter and a bass cat. We're a little limited on inventory because we're selling them so fast. But get with us if there's something specific that you want to ride in. Get a hold of me, Steve, or any of the sales folks here. And Bob, like you said, Hibdon Hooked. There's no better storyteller than Dion. I mean, just incredible. If you haven't watched some of the videos, like them on Facebook, share them, check them out. Michael Harlin Fishing. He just launched his new page. Wealth of knowledge here. I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Bob. And we're looking forward to doing this the next 3 weeks.
Love doing it. And guys, again, just to reiterate, if you're here this weekend, you're here on Friday, you're fishing Anglers in Action Tournament this Saturday, this coming Friday, the day before the Anglers in Action Tournament, you can stop by PB2 from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock and get a demo ride of the Camus boat. And first of all, you're going to love it. Whether you're in the market for a boat or not at this point, go take a ride in it. See what it's all about. You've been hearing a lot about it. Go check it out. So, Joe, thank you. Thank you, BoatWrx. Thanks, everybody. And by the way, I think Lawson and Payden are doing a pretty good job becoming storytellers, too. We'll see you guys next week.